Prof until he confirms that he can hear us. The background from his side is more louder than us talking this side. All right, I'll go back to him. Advocate Zanyiwa Sare, can you hear us? Advocate, you're on mute.
Hi, sorry, yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Advocate. Let me also check again the availability of Prof Sizwe. Prof, can you hear us? Prof, you are on mute. I think let me allow the moderator to continue. Prof will be able to join as we continue. Mr. Pierce, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to be part of this exciting session. I was involved a few years ago, and the topics that are discussed are always at the cutting edge. One of the topic we're going to be discussing today, in fact, is so current and, to use a teenager's term, so hot that I'm very, very keen to share what my colleagues are going to be talking about and their views. Why I say that is because the clock is ticking. We all know that the main law in South Africa, as far as privacy is concerned, is Papaya, the Protection of Personal Information Act. And for many years, perhaps just to give some background, it started as a white paper in 2003, and then it progressed to become a bill. And in around 2009, it had made significant progress, and by 2013 was promulgated. From 2013, many of us in the legal services and consulting sector had been saying, it's going to become a law next year. It's going to become a law next year. After 4 or 5 years, people were still, were getting quite tired of this and started calling some of us liars. But then, of course, the information regulator announced that the grace period had started running last year, and we've got now about 2 months left. And you will see, if you're involved in the sector, that everybody is now trying to get ready because, and I hope we hear from Prof on the information regulator's position, but I have a suspicion, and I have no basis for saying this, that the information regulator is going to take this law very, very seriously. And I think they are going to make sure that we are all compliant. The reason I say so is because my view is that this is a crucial piece of legislation to promote South Africa in the direction where it wants to go. The fourth industrial revolution is upon us. If we want to have a digital economy, we need to be able to promise those who will be making use of our facilities, of our services, of our jurisdiction, that we can protect them. So that is why I think it is such an important topic. We've seen 2 months ago, the Constitutional Court taking a decision on privacy-related aspects with regard to RICA, the regulation of interception and communications related. It's a long name, but RICA. Now, there the court made profound rulings with regard to protecting the rights of journalists, the rights of attorneys, and also ensuring that that process is one that will afford us the protections that we are given in terms of the Constitution. So this afternoon's discussion, I hope, is going to be an exciting one, an invigorating one, an animated one. Before we get into it, and perhaps the start is for each of our esteemed speakers, Ms. Abongile Mashele, Professor Sizwe, whom I know very well, Advocate Zanyiwe, a very, very good lawyer in this space. I would like to ask each of them perhaps to give some background, what they do, who they are, the history of their involvement in the sector. It would be great to really know who you are. And perhaps I can start with Advocate Zanyiwe Asare. Please go ahead, Advocate.
Thank you so much for that, Lucian. Let me just share my screen, perhaps. Let me do that, and then I'll just do a brief intro on who we are and or what we do. Let's just do Okay, so I can't share my screen for some reason, which is fine. That's okay. So what I'll do is maybe I'll just give a high level. So Digitally Legal is the company that I currently run. So we're a consultancy that specialize in regulation. Sorry, is my video on? There we go. Sorry. Okay. I think that's much better. So Digitally Legal is a consultancy company headquartered in Johannesburg, and we specialize in compliance, regulation, technology. Basically, we're the 4IR kids on the block. And what we essentially, our ultimate goal is to create a 4IR ready Africa, because we do believe that that is the next frontier, and that is the opportunity for Africa to sit at the global table when it comes to economic development and stability for our people. With data protection, compliance, and digital solutions being one of our flagship offerings, we've been geared towards helping people with their compliance measures, doing training and awareness sessions, which we've seen as a big component of not just having the laws, but having people being able to hold others accountable, but also to know what the rules of the game are when it comes to data protection and privacy. We're really more about just ticking the boxes. We are industry leaders. We're experts at data protection. We've got our legal expertise. We've got cybersecurity expertise, research, and technical risk and compliance knowledge as well. So we're really a fully fledged solution when it comes to data protection and privacy. So we're a bunch of techies and lawyers that come together and give our solutions. I think I will let the next panelist speak. That's just a brief high level on who I am and what we do as a company.
Thank you, Advocate. I can certainly attest to much of what the Advocate says. We've encountered each other on a number of occasions at industry events, and certainly somebody who is knowledgeable in the sector. I am going to ask Ms. Mashele to come next. I'm saving the best for last, Professor. So if I could let Ms. Mashele go next, I'd be very pleased to hear from you, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon to yourself, Lucian, and the fellow panel members, and everyone who is on the call. My name is Abongile Mashele. I am the Acting Chief Executive Officer of the Film and Publication Board. The Film and Publication Board is a state entity that was established in 1996, largely charged with the responsibility of regulating films, games, and certain publications to ensure that you have consumer advisories and you protect children from exposure to harmful content. And also the Film and Publication Board the Film and Publications Act actually was one of the first pieces of legislation that criminalized the distribution of child sexual abuse material, commonly known as child pornography, in the South African market. Now, how I think we fit into this particular panel and why maybe Zadna found it important to invite us is that our mandate and the work of the FPB has evolved as the technology has converged and the technology has evolved. We have found more of our work dwelling into the online space, protection of children online, be it from exposure to content or from distribution of their information and their material on online platforms. And data protection and data privacy is also a critical thing that we look into, even though it's not an element of the mandate of the board. It would fall under the information regulator, but the protection of the rights of children online is a critical part of the work of the Film and Publication Board, and certainly one of the reasons why I believe we are part of this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Mashele. I have so much to ask, and I hope we have an opportunity to probe some of the questions that I'd like to raise. I know the Film and Publication Board has been doing quite a lot in recent times, asserting itself admirably. So yes, hopefully we'll be able to discuss some of the issues that I would like to get your input on. But for now, I'm going to ask Professor Sizwe Snail-Gamduze to introduce himself, somebody who I also know very well from the sector, a very busy, in a good sense, member of the information regulator. Yes, I would almost say, and I hope I'm not stepping on any toes, to me, one of the most prominent members, apart, of course, from the chair. Over to you, Professor.
Hi, thank you very much, Lucian. See, my camera is not on. Okay, there we go. So yes, thank you for inviting me to this session on protection of personal information. You know, it's always very good to see that when people talk internet governance, that they acknowledge the fact that personal information is a key factor in the usage of electronic commerce, be it on applications on our phones, be it on websites. We are constantly sharing our personal information with e-vendors. That then also raises, you know, issues relating to security. And I guess I've been lucky enough to have been in the area of cybersecurity / cybercrime, only to end up in the area of data protection. And within data protection, I think one of the most important conditions would be the condition relating to safety security guards for protecting personal information. I think in 2021, with the advent of COVID, and you know, with us literally now for a year, having been doing meetings electronically, having been forced to literally do everything electronically, be it our work, be it our school, be it our interaction even with our medical doctors in certain instances, everything has been electronic. And there's just been a massive wave of personal information that's been flowing through the internet. And I think it is very important that we as cyber citizens or data subjects in our terminology, that we need to acknowledge that our personal information is out there. I mean, it was only Human Rights Day the other day. And one of the human rights that one must protect is privacy, hence the right to personal information. It is true that in a perfect society, one must have protection of personal information, yet access to information to create universal access to information and to ensure that even you know, the furthest and most of remote persons are connected to the internet and are part of our worldwide internet connectivity. So, you know, for me, I can obviously talk the whole afternoon about data protection. I can tell you about the 8 conditions, but I think today this is a different platform. It's more a platform for discussion, and I will allow the moderator of the session to lead further discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. I'm looking forward to discussion, because I think that the panel that we have bring so many different perspectives to what we're going to be discussing this afternoon. And on that, perhaps it's an opportune time for me to reiterate and repeat what that topic is. And the discussion essentially is what data cybersecurity and data protection legislation is in place in South Africa. How is it regulated? And what are the failures, challenges, and successes? Now, I am aware that some of you have prepared presentations. Advocate, if you have a presentation, perhaps now is the time, if you have sorted out your sharing, to perhaps give you an opportunity to speak on the topic. I know we are very tight for time, so I'm going to suggest perhaps that you speak for 5 minutes if you are going to. I'd just like you to give your views on data, cybersecurity and data protection legislation. Are there any failures, challenges and successes? If you have a different topic, perhaps please go ahead, or yeah, here's the floor is yours. Advocate, I think you are on mute.
There we go. Thank you so much for that. I said I'm using a new machine, so I need to open my preference system. So I'm just going to free flow with this one, because as Prof said, we deal with the subject content daily. So from a data protection perspective, I think from a South African perspective at least, and even maybe looking at the SADC region, the first talking point that I would like to go into is, I think, looking at what privacy means from a South African or SADC perspective. So we, especially from a South African perspective, come from a very, prejudicial past where the manipulation and usage or abuse of data for belonging to data subjects or personal information was used in a manner that really created havoc that we can still feel to this day. So the importance of data protection is something that, yes, should be stressed, but can be practically conveyed to anybody. So when you explain to somebody that, in the times of apartheid, people's personal information was used in a manner to keep people in certain areas, so that would be a freedom, restriction of liberties and freedom of movement. When you explain to people that, people were segregated based on that manipulation, I think it's an easy thing to understand. But now the question is, how does that translate to us now, after the evolution of South Africa going from apartheid South Africa to a democratic South Africa to what we're doing right, or how we're living right now, with technology interfacing everything, or intersecting everything that we do. And the simple question here, the simple answer here is, when it comes to the actual data protection legislation, you won't know what you don't know. So there's a big element of literacy. So understanding what exactly your role is in this whole thing, and why is this legislation so important? So, we generally stress the individual's rights, and we generally stress that citizens are to be protected, or the data subject in this particular instance is key or king. But what does that mean with laws that, what does that mean with, Yandisa, can you just put your thing on mute, please? Thank you. So the question is, what does that mean from enacting, or what does that mean from actually applying these laws? So let's even use an example that we find ourselves in South Africa post the 1st of July 2021. What does that mean for the everyday person on the street who happens to be in a batch of people who whose information has been hacked or breached? Or does that particular individual, are they equipped with enough information to actually go about and interact with the information regulator, or to ask the correct questions when it comes to the responsible party? And I don't really think we're there yet. With the amount of time that we spent in South Africa discussing Papaya, and as Lishan had correctly put, people thought we were lying and we were just trying to get people riled up or scared. We're here now, but the question is, what are we doing from a literacy perspective? Now, if we look at the relationship that people generally talk about when it comes to Papaya, we talk about the responsible party. We also talk about issues of surveillance, and there's a big cloud, over that, because it's really talking about the citizens' rights and the government and not doing certain things. And we look at it also at a global perspective, where we see different abuses from a media perspective, where personal information is used incorrectly or used in a manner that pushes for political agendas. But what do we do now, or how do we have the discussion around conglomerates and big corporations like the likes of Facebook, and the application of the Papaya in that particular example, and not just having a discussion, but what does legislation itself actually say? And I think those are the conversations that we need to be having post the 1st of July, 2021. Right now, it's really, yes, we should be talking about compliance. We should be talking about responsible data processing. We should be talking about ensuring that people are cyber secure and safe. But that is from a South African perspective. What are we doing with international companies that have proven to say one thing when it comes to compliance, not just with Papaya, but internationally with GDPR in Europe? What are we going to do as South Africans to keep those kind of actors in check, and to ensure that we're protecting ourselves, also with the cross border transfer or storage of our information? How exactly are we going to do that? How are we going to ensure that we're empowering our citizens to protect themselves outside of the concepts of national security? So, Lucian, I think I will stop. I don't want to take too much time because I see that I've gone close to my 5 minutes.
Thank you, Advocate. I think you've certainly given food for thought. You've mentioned Papaya. I know you've done a fair amount of work in this. From your perspective, and I don't want to step on any toes here, Prof, think that it is adequate, and if the information regulator does what I think it can do you think that Papaya gives foreign investors, people who want to come here and take part in our digital economy, enough comfort? Is it strong enough and world-class to give them that comfort?
Sorry, Lucian, was that a question for me or for Prof?
Yes. Your view, is Papaya sufficiently strong enough, or is it world-class enough to give people who will bring their personal information for storage or for use in South Africa? Do you think it's sufficient for those purposes? And do you think that it gives the information regulator enough power to give investors and people who bring their personal information to the country confidence that it will be protected?
So, Lucian, I think the answer to that question is multifaceted, because when you talk about foreign investors, we're not just talking about the protection of personal information itself as an act and data processing. We're talking about elements of cybersecurity as well, and we're obviously talking about a sound economic environment where people are actually partaking in economic activities where we have cybersecurity and data protection elements encompassed in how business is run. And as we all know, South Africa is not the most cyber secure country. So in that in itself is quite an indicative answer of poor data protection processes. So if we are having poor cybersecurity elements in our country already, when we talk about economics, then we also equally have poor data protection practices and processing practices. And I think at this point in time, that's a very difficult question to answer, because we don't have use cases in terms of how does the information regulator actually go after perpetrators or people that, one, are found lacking and wanting when it comes to data protection or adequate data protection policies, implementation from a technical and organizational perspective, but also two, people that are actually going out of their way to create these vulnerabilities and to ensure that they capitalize on these loopholes or gaps, as we call it, when it comes to the actual protection. So I think the next year or two will be very interesting, because then we'd be able to show foreign investors that, look, we understand that cybersecurity and data breaches are things that happen on the daily, especially with how technology keeps on advancing. You've got one side people advancing technology for good, and then you've got on the other end people advancing technology for illicit activities. So the next year or two is going to be very interesting and quite important for the very question that you're asking for foreign investors, because they'll see that in the event that something does go wrong, the information regulator is not just barking, the information regulator has teeth. So all eyes are on Prof and his team over there. And yeah, that's my short answer.
Thank you so much for that. And we will give opportunities for questions. I think in the meantime, if people do have questions for the advocate, perhaps pop them in the Q&A, and then we will address them once we have the floor open in the last 5 minutes. But if I can, thank you, Advocate. I'm going to now hand over to Ms. Mashele to give her view and her perspective, perhaps from the FPB, as to how personal information will be regulated and perhaps what their main concerns are from their perspective. Over to you, Ms. Mashele.
Thank you very much. I think I liked the way the question was phrased from the beginning, because I am a firm believer, and I also think as the Film and Publication, we are a firm believer that if as a country, we focus on one aspect of cybersecurity and not looking at it in its complete totality, we will always be on the back foot and we will always be catching up, because the reality is that technology has meant that the various regulatory instruments that you have in the country need to somehow speak to each other. There needs to be some kind of coherence to ensure that when we talk about cyber safety or cyber security for the South African consumer, yes, we are talking about data protection, but we also need to always remember that there are other issues that we need to constantly look at and ensure that we have the necessary or the adequate instruments to deal with them. And these range from data protection, as we are focusing on in this particular panel. It also ranges to issues like competition. It's always coming up. How we're dealing with competition amongst the online platforms. And I think we have bodies such as the Competition Commission that are dealing with these matters. Something that has become a big issue in the last couple of years is issues such as misinformation or disinformation online, as well as the protection of children, especially child sexual abuse material, as well as exposure of children to harmful content. So when you look at everything as FPB, we are always saying that protection of a child is cross-cutting throughout all these various elements. So when we assess whether we have the adequate instruments, we have to ensure that we assess across the board to ensure that the regulatory instruments that are there are agile enough to be able to respond, obviously, to the nature of the sector, because you cannot have processes that will take 10 years or to be approved or to be processed, because the reality is that you will frustrate the companies. It will lead to flight of some of the companies where they choose to not to trade, or they opt not to trade. So our process is agile enough to be able to accommodate the requirements of industry. Secondly, is the policy coherence, because I think if there is no policy coherence in the country, it also becomes an element that frustrates industry, because the Competition Commission will make a ruling about one particular aspect, like I understand that it was made this afternoon. The information regulator will investigate maybe the same issue, looking at the same company, and that can lead to frustration as well of the industry. So are we creating, as the institutions that are there, a conducive environment for companies to be able to trade and engage with our consumers? And the last area that I think we always look at and we focus on as the Film and Publication Board, and I think the previous speaker touched on, is the literacy, consumer literacy, because it does not matter what the information regulator may put in place and the companies may then try to adhere. If the consumers are not aware, they will not be able to raise alarm bells if there is an issue that needs to be addressed. So consumer education is important and it is critical. And consumer education that is stratified in such a way that the messaging reaches the correct audiences, so that everyone understands exactly what is required of them. They also understand what are the reporting mechanisms that are in place, so that if there is a transgression in place, or if there is an issue that they would want to deal with, they know exactly how to deal with that. If I were to talk about where we are as a country on the three items that I have raised, I think we still have some way to go. There are some pockets of excellence that are there, that have been that have started working together, but I think we still have a long way to go. And the important thing for me is to ensure that there is clarity, there's regulatory certainty, there's cohesion in the country so that we do not frustrate, and also then there is a great deal of consumer awareness. And I think when I talk about consumer awareness, it's something that we're very passionate about. It's the Film and Publication Board. And we believe in order for us to reach consumers and speak to consumers in the languages that they can understand, we also need to pool the resources of all the available regulatory bodies that we have, be it self-regulatory bodies or government regulatory bodies. We bring everyone together so that we have one digital literacy campaign that would actually incorporate some of the aspects that we are dealing with today on protection of personal data and information. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mashele. You know, you've really put it succinctly, and you've covered so many areas that I think are so pertinent to this. You know, I struggle to articulate this sort of thing, and I think you've really put it very clearly. One of the aspects perhaps that I want you perhaps just to give us an idea of is that I know you've had a fair amount of success in recently getting the online content providers to cooperate with the FPB. There was a bumping of heads at one point, but I see everyone is more or less on side. One of the concerns that I personally have is if you have a content provider based in another jurisdiction and they're collecting personal information. Take me, for example. I subscribe to one and I have my kids' information on that as well. I've set up profiles for them. Their names, details, etc. are there simply to allow them to watch certain types of content, which of course the FPB has very thankfully gotten involved in and helped with ratings. But is it not a concern from your perspective as the FPB that with some of these content providers based abroad, there's the potential for them not to comply with our privacy laws? And how do you see us perhaps making sure that we're able to keep them in line?
From our side as the Film and Publication Board, we had the, I would say, advantage of a legislative instrument that was quite technologically neutral in as far as how far our mandate extends. So it assisted us to be able to have engagements with the film distributors that are distributing in the South African market, which is how we got to where we are with some of the big players. But obviously, we also had to adapt and we also had to adjust our processes and our mindset as the Film and Publication Board on how we view content classification and the machinations around content classification. And that talks to the agility that I talked to earlier, because there was no way we could do what we do as the FPB with some of these platforms the same way we did it 5 years ago. So we had to adjust, and we also had to improvise and evolve as an institution. That's just one way of how we have managed to gain some traction and support in the industry. But now, when it comes to the question that you're asking about the privacy of our information, this is where partnership between institutions such as ourselves and the information regulator then becomes important, because we also don't want to be accused of overreach as the FPB, because that's not an aspect of our mandate. But collectively, we could always approach these companies so that the information regulator can clearly articulate and outline what are the requirements for the South African market to ensure that the privacy settings of the platform adhere to the information the regulations that we have in place. I understand that the regulator is still working on some of these regulations, but this is definitely some of the areas when I talk about coherence and I talk about partnership of the regulatory bodies, this is where it becomes important, because where an institution has already gained traction, we can always then work collectively so that they can then share the information with the other party and ensure compliance. Because from what I have seen with a lot of these companies, that they've also evolved from where they were 5 years ago. 5 years ago, it was very easy for them to see that, for them to say, we are not in your country, we're not operating in your country, therefore, we are not going to do anything. But they have seen that that approach has not helped, because the reality is that something will go wrong. And the whole point and the whole purpose of a regulatory environment or a regulatory instrument that is attached to the consumer of that jurisdiction is so that when something goes wrong, you have a safeguard, you are protected in a way so that consumers do not feel aggrieved, they do not feel like they are not heard, they do not feel like there's lack of accountability. So it then becomes important for them to also come to the party. And I think I've seen gradually a lot of them actually coming to the party in various jurisdictions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mashele. I certainly think that that you're right. It does seem like they are coming to the party, and it is a good thing that they are complying with our laws. You know, if they want to do business here, they have to toe the line. Thank you for that. We don't have too much time left, so I'm going to give Professor Sizwe Snail the floor. Prof, if you can, you know, one of the issues, I won't really call it an issue, but something that gives me a lot of thought is whether the regulator will be capacitated to address many of the challenges that are likely to arise from the 1st of July. Do you think that the regulator is ready to address many of the aspects that it is going to be faced with from the date onwards? We'd love your views on that, please, Prof.
Thank you, Lucian. I think it's been a long time coming. I mean, the Papaya has been enacted in 2013. The Office of the Regulator was established in 2016, December. So we've literally had 4 years of the first term of the regulator really spending time just setting up shop, doing international benchmarking, drafting regulations. There's a plethora of guidelines, guidance notes that we're busy with, putting them onto websites. There's a whole lot of issues that, you know, need to be dealt with still before the 1st of July, 2021. Is the regulator ready? Of course, we are ready. The question that one must ask is, are you ready? Because at the end of the day, you know, it is the regulator that will be regulating the compliance with this law. And, you know, I always say the Papaya is not a prohibiting piece of legislation. It's actually enabling legislation. And I'll tell you why. It's enabling legislation because it sets out, for lack of choice of better words, a code of conduct, and not the code of conduct as set in Papaya, but it sets a standard. Let me use the word standard so that I don't confuse anyone. It sets a standard of 8 conditions that any responsible party needs to adhere to. Long gone are the days where data protection is their problem. It's not our problem. It's the ICT problem. It is literally everybody's problem. Anyone who processes personal information. I always draw the analogy from the farmer in Tanin who has his book of the people that he supplies with the names and the telephone numbers. I compare him to the bank in Sandton that has a database of its 4 million customers. And this is where Papaya really talks to the issues. I mean, if you look at section 19, like I said, the one that deals particularly with safeguards, it talks about technical and organizational safeguards. We always think that Papaya is all about electronics. It's not all about electronics. Papaya is also applicable in your office space. Those places where paper-based information or personal information in particular is still being processed, then you must still apply Papaya. So if your technical and organizational mechanism would require you to have cupboards and locks in your organization and certain other prohibitive measures to protect the information, then that is what Papaya is asking you to do. But if you are having, like I said, 4 million customers and you have an electronic database somewhere, then from a technical point of view, you obviously need to spend X amount million of rand for that technical infrastructure that is appropriate to that type of service. And then from an organizational point of view, you need to teach everyone in the organization. And I always preach this. You don't just teach the CEO and his management. This thing needs to trickle down to the senior managers, to the normal staff in the office, and right down to the clerical staff. You'll be amazed what you put into your dustbin. You'll be amazed with personal information. Instead of shredding, you just throw in your dustbin and other people can use same unscrupulously. So, I think I'm just going to leave you with the message to say, July the 1st, 2021 is happening. Yes, we are still within the grace period. And I'm going to repeat, the grace period is not a period to stay non-compliant, but it is a period to get compliant, to get your house in order, so that when the 1st of July comes, you can say, I understand the 8 principles, I have an information officer, I've registered him, and identifiers in terms of 57 and 58, then those things must all be addressed. So, the same way in a law firm, you do your yearly audit and you must do it, you are now required to do so.
Prof, are you still there? It seems like we might have lost Professor Kamduze. Are you able to hear me? Perhaps, Advocate, perhaps you could let me know if it's on my side or if it's on the professor's side.
No, it's definitely on the professor's side. We can hear you clearly.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Perhaps while we wait for him to come back, we are out of time, and it would be unfair not to address some of the questions that have been put on the Q&A. And I think great, we've got the professor back. Prof,
yes,
can you hear me?
But I was generally done with what I wanted to say, so I think let's go over to the Q&A.
Thank you. Yeah, we are over time, so I've got 4 questions that I see. I am going to ask perhaps the first one, and it might be directed, Advocate, at yourself. And the question is from, I hope you don't mind me saying your names. I'm assuming that if you had wanted us to keep your PI secret, you would have asked the question anonymously, but it's from Mr. Brown or Ms. Brown. How is South Africa's poor cybersecurity measured and against whom? Advocate, I think that might be directed at you. You had mentioned that. Do you want to perhaps address that question?
So, I think it's Mr. Calvin Brown. So the question about poor cybersecurity. So how we deduce or how we get to that conclusion is looking at the different consultant firms or auditing reports. So for instance, Accenture reported that in 2019, South Africa was experiencing about 577 cyber attacks per day. And then also if you look at Sabrix and you look at the likes of PwC, Accenture reports alike, there was about 79.5 to 80% card not present frauds. So obviously this means that there's a big element of digital spaces or digital platforms and tools used for fraudulent activities. It would be different if maybe it's the actual misplacing of cards, and that's how people's money gets disappeared. But a lot of it is really used over the cyberspace and those kind of elements. But another factor that we really need to look at, a lot of the times when we have these conversations about poor cybersecurity and even the question like yours, we look at it a lot from a Euro-American eye, where, in Euro-America, even if you don't have the resources necessarily to buy cybersecurity tools from a firewall perspective, or to ensure that there's no malware in your systems, we have major issues. We've got power shortages from a South African perspective, and even our data processors, so our responsible parties, can find themselves, in situations where they are either in underserviced areas, where they are marginalized peoples themselves, where they cannot afford the resources to become cyber secure. And that's a majority of our population. So from an Africa perspective, we're not just dealing with people not wanting to be cyber secure, we're dealing with other economic or socioeconomic factors. So yes, that's my answer.
Thank you very much for that, Advocate. I think a comprehensive answer. Calvin, I hope you are happy. You've got one more question, but I'd like to direct this at Ms. Mashele. And it relates to some of the technological aspects that she mentioned earlier. The question, Ms. Mashele, is technological advancements, and this is from Lerato Ntwambe, technological advancements are happening rapidly, and our law is constantly trying to catch up at a very slow pace in South Africa. How can we assist government in prioritizing this?
What's the capital?
We're requesting 106.
Someone?
What is the capital damages?
I think, Ms. Mashele, you can go ahead. It might be that Prof. Kamduze is still got his mic on. Prof, if you could mute.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is the question on how can ordinary citizens assist government to be able to respond to the technological advances? That's a tricky one, hey? Because my view and my approach is that regulation moving forward is really going to have to be a partnership between industry and government or the regulator or whoever, because I do not think you can ever have policy instruments or regulatory instruments that can be at an advanced level. Definitely, it works to your advantage to know, to have tech-savvy people in regulators who know how technology is evolving and how it will impact the regulatory instruments or government policy. But I think moving forward, the best way how we can assist and even citizens can assist is for us to lobby for core regulatory approaches to regulation. Steadfast rules, as good as they may be, and I'm not a lawyer, so no offense to the attorneys, but a law that is going to be take 4 years to review and appeal because it has to go through the legislative processes, I do not necessarily think is the way to go. But a legal instrument that talks about public accountability and core regulatory mechanisms by both industry and government is the future for me. It is the future of regulation, because it will allow us to adapt and be agile, which is what is needed in the sector moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mashele, for that. I'm going to very, very quickly ask Prof. Snail Gamduze to answer this. It's from Calvin Brown again, and then I'm going to address the last comment, I suppose, from Kodisan Tswane. Prof, when will company information officers be able to be registered in terms of Papaya?
Thank you for that. We're busy with for finalizing the guideline for registration of information officers. So I think in a day or two, please do visit the website of the information officer. There will be a guideline specifically dealing with registration of information officers. And no, there's no deadline of the 31st of March as has been spreading around. But yes, we are going to start taking registrations via an electronic portal, and you will be able to do so via the website of the information regulator.
Thanks a lot, Prof. We're out of time, and I'm probably going to get into trouble with the chair, but I'm just going to address Kodi-san's last comment. The statement is as follows. Afternoon, I have a statement rather than a question. I hope that we can focus on developing our own search engines, email platforms, and social media platforms. The bulk of our IP and personal information is abroad, and I feel we must move in the direction of creating our own platforms. The French have Quant, the Russians have Yandex, and the Chinese have WeChat, to mention a few. I think, Kodi-san, you make an excellent point. I think if we are going to move and become an information economy, we're going to need to be on the same or even better footing. And on that note, Chair, thank you to our speakers, our panel. Really informative. I think we've really gotten information and input from people at the top of the industry, and also an upfront and early, I won't call it an early warning, but at least we know in the next 2 days, the information regulator will be taking registration. So thank you for that, Prof. Over to you, Chair. Thank you, everyone. This has been an excellent session. I hope it was informative, and thank you so much to the panel. Take care and bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pease. But before we let the professor to leave, I heard from the discussion where he said the date of the 30th, it's not normally it's not really the correct date. Prof, do you perhaps have latest information in that relation?
Yes, I don't want to make a mistake here. The 31st of July is the compliance date in terms of Papaya. In other words, that is the sunset day, the 31st of July. I mean, sorry, the 31st of June. That is the sunset. So by the 1st of July, everyone must be compliant. But there have been rumors spreading now about the registration of information officers and that is closing on the 31st of March. That is not true. If anything, the portal is opening now, and I'm sure we'll be taking registrations right up until the 31st of June to ensure that by the 1st of July, everybody who should be registered is registered.
Thank you so much, Prof, for that clarity. Much appreciated. Colleagues, please allow me to thank the moderator and the panelists. I hope the discussion was a good one for everybody. Based on the questions that were posed, I want to believe that it was indeed very informative. Colleagues, the next session will be starting at 3:15. That is the critical internet resources on domain names, who is access model, and law enforcement. Maybe perhaps I should allow ourselves to take a break, and we shall reconvene at 3:15. Thank you again, colleagues.